why Lazarus? That's the question I want to put forward today. Why Lazarus? Jesus has healed a lot of people and shown a lot of signs. Raising a man from the dead, this is the one. This is the one that solidified the plot to kill him. It's one thing to give sight to the blind, help people walk, cure these bleeding disorders, etc., etc. You raise a man from the dead, now we've got to destroy you. Now you could start a movement that would raise up a lot of excitement that would get Rome in here to destroy us. We don't need this. And you would think, if you were a Hollywood screenwriter and you were going to make this story as dramatic as possible, you'd make him raise somebody else from the dead, somebody everybody's heard of. Maybe a Pharisee. If I were writing this as a fiction story, and this is one of my pieces of evidence why the Gospels happened, if you were just going to write this story in as dramatic a way to get people's attention as you could, I would have, if I were writing it anyway, I would have him raise from the dead the last big-time Pharisee that died. Because that would get the Pharisees to really have to deal with this. I would raise up somebody whose name was known far and wide and say, wow, if Jesus were to come back today in 21st century America, would he raise Elvis? Possibly Ronald Reagan? A deceased president, somebody everybody would recognize. I don't know who exactly would fit the bill in first century, but it wasn't Lazarus. And we know that Lazarus was sort of an anonymous person because, and again, this is no offense to the gender issues of today, but then if you were defined by who your sisters were, you weren't really famous. This is a society founded on men's names. If you're the son of so-and-so, that's who you are. But to be the brother of Mary and Martha, well, this wasn't a well-known guy. I gotta be honest. It's still today, though. It does concern me when people refer to a woman, and maybe for a prayer concern or something, and they say, Mrs. John Doe, and I'll say, well, what's her name? Oh, I don't know. How do you don't lose your name when you get married, even if you change your last one. And that always frustrated me, and that's maybe a product of my generation. It doesn't seem to be as big a deal to my grandmother as it is to me. But in the first century, that wouldn't even been a question. You were defined by the men in your family. So this verse tells us Lazarus was kind of a nobody. Kind of just an average Joe, we would call him today. We know him through his sisters, who are, Mary, the one who we know as the one who anointed his feet. It's a lot like the way we do when we mention a name for prayers and not everybody knows who that person is. If it's a cousin of or a relative of so-and-so that we do know, then okay, we make the connection. And even though we really don't know that person any better, if we know a relative, it helps us make that kind of human and personal connection. And then our prayer is a little deeper for someone we know than a stranger. But Lazarus could have been anybody. It could have been anybody that Jesus raised from the dead. But it wasn't just anybody, it was this Lazarus. And if I were to continue the theme of if I wrote the Gospels from scratch without the real story, I would make Lazarus the founder of the church. Because don't you think that somebody brought back from a grave would be the greatest salesman for Jesus ever? And yet, the one who is chosen to lead the church is Peter, who denies him 3 times and is shown to be a very fallible human being. All were fallible human beings, but you would think somebody like Lazarus might be a little more encouraged, a little more spirited. But as we know, Lazarus died again, like every one of the disciples. Every one of the followers of Jesus died. And so this resurrection is not there just for Lazarus' sake, but to show the glory of God. And Jesus tells his disciples that. We're going to use this opportunity to show the power of God. So maybe the fact that it's Joe Everyman, Lazarus of Bethany, who you never heard of until John wrote his name down, maybe that tells us something. Maybe that tells us that you and I, the anonymous ones, have a friend in Jesus too. call Lazarus our friend. And we don't know who all the friends of Jesus are in his time on earth. But we certainly sing that hymn that we are friends of Jesus. This is good news. Because see, you and I are anonymous too. Some of us may have more friends than others and may be known to a few more than others. But for the most part, we live lives of anonymity. When we die, if our obituary is in the daily item, a vast majority of the readership of that paper, which isn't even that big, will have never heard of us. Maybe if it's in the Snyder County Times, more people who read it will have heard of us. But most people in the world have no idea who you are. No idea who I am. And that's okay. And this is where the generational dividing line may relate to the story different. Because if you're my age or younger, that's kind of unnerving. To be called anonymous or the everyman, we don't like to hear that. Because if you've been born in the 70s or later, you've grown up your whole life with everything in society telling you, you are special. You are a beautiful and unique snowflake just like everybody else. I find that people who are older have a much easier time being anonymous. But if you're post-baby boom, you got to make your mark. There's a reason that MySpace is such an enormous phenomenon on the internet. I don't have an account yet, by the way. This is my old man in me. I refuse to make a MySpace account. I'm over 30, so I guess I don't need one. The thing they do on MySpace is you count how many friends you have. And you can have up to 10,000, 20,000 friends. And you get a friend just by them linking to your page and saying they're your friend. Well, isn't that nice? Andy Warhol said in the 60s, in the future everybody will be famous for 15 minutes. And I'll tell you, my generation is trying hard. We're trying hard to each of us make our 15 minutes. Now we define it as 100,000 hits on YouTube. So the younger people may relate to this anxiety a little more of, what if nobody knows who I am? What if I don't make my huge mark? That seems to be a modern cultural phenomenon that didn't exist before. Being part of the greater good was of value. Being one of thousands of soldiers at Normandy, whose names are not known by everybody, made a mark on the world. And I don't mean to put down my generation or those younger. It's just the way it is. We have this idea. We have to be known. So if that's where you are, then there's good news today, because even if you're not known, even if you don't have 20,000 friends on MySpace, even if your obituary is an inch long and nobody that reads it has any idea who you were, there's one friend that counts, if I may offer a bit of a cliche, and that friend is Jesus. Because Jesus had time to raise Lazarus. Jesus, of all the people he could have raised from the dead, picked this somewhat anonymous man to show forth the glory of God. He didn't have to be a famous Pharisee. He didn't have to be a politician. He didn't have to be known far and wide. You and I are friends of Jesus, and we don't have to be known far and wide. Our name doesn't have to be recognizable to the masses. We don't have to make our mark in the way that a society based on celebrity decides is how you make your mark, by fame. No, we can make our mark simply by sharing the love of Christ, simply by sharing the message of Jesus. And in that way, we only need one friend. We only need that friend because that's the one who provides us salvation. That's the one who provides us life. That's the one who provides us resurrection. You don't have to be on the list. The circle of Jesus' friends is much bigger than his inner circle of disciples. You don't have to make the cut by somebody else's criteria. You are loved by God. And the power of God to restore life is there for you. And the promise of God's salvation to give life in the kingdom to come is there for each of us. No matter how many friends you have on the internet, no matter whether you use the internet at all, you matter to God. You're a friend of Jesus. And if you just are known to some as coming from the village of Richfield, cousin of so-and-so and member of St. John Lutheran, and that's all anybody ever knew about you, that's all God needs to know. And God provided for Lazarus, and God provides for us. May we rejoice in this great gift of resurrection. Amen.